news presentation.
Well, a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Interface. My name is Tembi Samachele. As South Africa celebrated Freedom Day, President Zuma bestowed national orders on distinguished South Africans as well as foreign nationals who contributed meaningfully to the country's social, economic and political development. Now, one of those recipients was civil rights campaigner, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and he is our guest tonight. And you know that to join in the discussion, you can always comment on our Facebook page or send us a text. That is 33726. That's our SMS line, or on our Facebook page, Interface on SABC3. That's how we keep the conversation going. Let's welcome our guest. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Jackson.
Good to be here tonight and good to be back in South Africa again, and particularly on this 19th anniversary occasion.
Yes, and congrats on the honors bestowed on you.
Well, thank you. It was a kind of double honor. It's honored to receive the award from the country presented by President Zuma, but also the Oliver Tambo Companionship Award. I actually had met him several times. Hosted him in the United States on several occasions. When I first came in 1979, there was a ban on coming to South Africa at that time, but he and Johnny McAteeney made it possible for me to come in with ANC's blessing, and came as a guest of the South African Council of Churches headed by Frank Shikane and the U.S. National Council of Churches. And so it was a church access to South Africa and to see the raw ugliness and the darkness and violence of the apartheid period.
Yeah, you've had a very long relationship with South Africa over the years, and you know you've come here quite a number of times. What do you make of our freedom and what progress we've made as a country in the 19 years?
You know, I was born in Greenville, South Carolina, and South Carolina and South Africa have such similarities. I mean, the 1948 bans here in South Africa came after the 1896 laws in the U.S. So apartheid here, segregation there, but basically the same system.
Yeah.
We were keenly aware of this struggle, and I cannot help but think when we came in '79, it was an eye-opener to get back to the American public just what the system was and America's investment in the system. We had pension funds invested here, and church funds invested here, and labor unions were here, funds invested here, and corporations were here, and we had to help break the backbone of that wretched system by challenging those dimensions of our society. And so we were able to, in the end, make it happen. After a year of boycotting every day, going to jail every day, led by Randall Robinson and Dr. Mary Frances Berry and Reverend Walter Fauntroy, we were able to get the U.S. Congress, led by the Congressional Black Caucus, to declare sanctions on the apartheid system.
Yeah.
I think that was the big blow. They finally put apartheid in isolation and now they allowed a new, free, democratic South Africa to emerge.
And now 19 years into our democracy, the question I'm asking is, what do you make of the progress that we've made?
Well, it's been amazing. When you think about that you've been free 19 years. We look at Britain at age 19.
Yeah.
Look at America at age 19, a slave-holding, trading country at age 19. We're one of the most inclusive constitutions in the whole world in South Africa here today. To see people now to go from Smuts Airport to Oliver Tambo Airport, that kind of symbolic change. You see South African people who are black, Indian, white, colored, working all over the place. You see a certain growth. These growth cycles are not without stumblings along the way. But you fall down, you get back up again because the ground is no place for champions. So after 19 years, you're doing exceptionally well. I would submit to you that race apartheid was humiliating, it was derogatory, it was violent, it was painful. You remove the skin color apartheid, so there's no longer the humiliation. But then there's land apartheid, there is healthcare apartheid, there's education apartheid, there's apartheid based upon inheritance sustaining the economic underpin, there's agricultural apartheid, there's banking, so there are layers deep and miles to go. So this generation can not only look back at the history of what the martyrs who served time in prison did, what people like Nelson Mandela and Mbeki and Sisulu and Zuma and Mbeki, what they did. There's work to be done to fight apartheid now. mean,
it's interesting you say that, Reverend Jackson, because at the moment in the country we're having this big debate around, you know, how far back should we look, or how often should we look back at the road that we've traveled? How much can we blame on apartheid, and how much should we take responsibility for and say, okay, this is us in this dispensation, and this is what we should account for?
You must take more responsibility for the days ahead, but in the days when it was illegal for all practical purposes to read and write, I remember, when I came in '79, we went to Soweto, and when Mandela wanted to see her, but she was at house arrest at that time. And went to Port Elizabeth and KwaZulu-Land and Durban and all of that. And I saw this will to dignity. The children were being forced to learn Afrikaans, and they were resisting Afrikaans. They wanted to embrace Xhosa, their own language, the English as it were. And I remember that night it was raining, and children were on these long wooden benches being taught by some inspired teacher, and they were writing letters in the mud, and they had a cardboard on a tree, writing their letters and alphabets on that tree. And then they would get up and do Toya Toya. Such a will to dignity could not be repressed. Lies couldn't stop it. Guns couldn't kill it as it did Chris Honda and Steve Biko. And so it could not be deterred. Now that you're free, now the issue to get equal. We're free but not equal. And that is the difference. Many of our freedom allies may not be our equality allies. But
how do we deal with the equality issue? What do we need to do as a society? Because we're battling with that. What do we do to make ourselves equal? Is
just a strong dose of education. Education is a lever. Strong minds break strong chains. That's a part of it. As you go toward a fairer distribution of land, access to banking, to capital, industry, and technology, we must in fact master those skills to impress our strength into those industries. And one can see that this is really a kind of morning time in South Africa. I know there's a certain understandable impatience, but this is morning time. This is 19 years into a very new process. You still have the first generation going to college.
But your country has been free for much longer than we have. What can we learn from the U.S. in terms of education in particular?
We've been free for 48 years,
yes.
1968.
But the question I'm getting to is, education gets the biggest chunk of our budget every year, and still we're not getting it right. What more do you think we need to do?
We're not getting it right. In America today, African Americans are probably number one in the presidential politics and athletics and entertainment, number one in infant mortality, number one in short life expectancy, number one behind in education. We're fighting to overcome those odds.
Yeah.
We're really fighting the parallel battles. I'm saying be inspired by how you survived the night. Now look at what you can do in the day. One, so there are more educated South Africans. There are more housed South Africans. There are more aspiring, ambitious South Africans, because clearly now there's nothing you cannot become. 19 years ago was almost nothing that you could become.
Yeah.
Now there's nothing a black South African cannot become. There's no car dealership you cannot own. There's no food franchise you cannot run. There's no government post you cannot hold.
But how do we stir up that spirit? Because I think that's what we need as a country, to stir up that very spirit that got us out of those dark days.
Well, the Bible says, remove not the ancient landmarks which our mothers and fathers have set. And the frames of reference of verse, and if you didn't just happen to get free one day, because of exiles, and assassinations and sufferings and imprisonment, a generation they built the wall of dignity. Now there are walls that this generation must cross those walls. This generation doesn't have to fight for freedom. It does have to fight for equality. And that means having the skill set to in fact master capital, industry, technology, and deal flow.
All right, let's take a quick break. We're chatting to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, talking about our freedom and what we need to do to make it better and move it from freedom to equality, or on both fronts, make the most of it. Do give us your thoughts on our SMS line. It's 33726, or on our Facebook page. That's Interface on SABC3. We're back after this. And you're back with Interface. You're on SABC3, and our guest is Reverend Jesse Jackson, and he is chatting to us about all things freedom and equality, and also giving us some thoughts on some of the key issues happening in our country today. Welcome back, Reverend. And you know, one of the things that you touched on is the work that you do on the African continent when we were chatting off air. And I know that that's something that we are passionate about as a country as well. We do a lot of work elsewhere on the continent. And right now, there's a lot of debate around the deployment of our troops in countries like the Central African Republic and also now in Eastern DRC. You know, how do we strike a balance there between helping our neighbors and also not putting our people in the line of danger?
Unless you stop the violence next door, you'll have refugees here. So to end violence anywhere is a move towards stability everywhere. Our world has become much too violent, much too much poverty, much too much money spent on guns rather than books, and so we have some shared interest in peace. As I think about Dr. King coming here in 1957 into Ghana when Nkrumah was set free, how parallels our struggles are. Apartheid ended in America in 1954. Ghana got its freedom in 1957. Luther King went to jail in 1963. Kenyatta was freed in 63. Mandela went to jail in 63. And how our struggles kept moving. We finally got the right to vote in 65. And but that what we used to help free South Africa and its stress by 1990 and then 94. So racism and Nazism and fascism was a threat to all of humanity. We're fighting Nazism in Germany, or fascism in Italy, or slavery in America, or apartheid in South Africa. We really are one family. We're inextricably locked and bound. We must see ourselves as parts of a human race.
And speaking of racism, I mean, in our country, a lot of people have said that we have not really dealt with that. We moved so fast in trying to get into the new dispensation that even though we had the Truth and Reconciliation process, we didn't dig deep enough. And that's why every now and again, we have a painting that upsets us and we have something else that will upset the racial dynamics in our country.
Well,
how do we put that to bed
there
once
are
and for all?
dimensions to go, but at least racism now is illegal. In 1979, racism was legal. Denying Africans, blacks the right to vote was legal. Denying the right to an education was legal. Putting you in the Bantu stand was legal. Trying to impose Afrikaner upon you was the state's right. So at least you made that sick system illegal, and you see white people trying to overcome it. You see whites and blacks and brown and coloreds and Indians moving toward a new day. But this will be a long struggle because you remove that epidermis, you remove the skin color level where you can now walk streets and you can have passports and not pass books. You got that part down. But now there's unfinished business. That's why this generation cannot just look back or even be critical looking back. But now what are you going to do about the need for have more access to banking and land? I mean, who makes the eggs who that you eat or the food that you eat? Who is in agribusiness? Who's in banking? Who's in housing? Who's in construction? That means a commitment, a passionate commitment to engineering and science and technology and math.
Here's the thing with that though. A lot of the times when there are efforts to try and bring some balance in terms of the representation when it comes to who makes the houses and who does all of these things, corruption creeps up. That's a big bugbear in our country and also elsewhere in the world. And I know that you've been implicated in it in your own country. Your son has just pleaded guilty to it quite recently. How do we deal with this thing, this beast called corruption in government in particular?
You deal with oversight, checks and balances, and one set of rules. You can't stop it, but you can deter it by enforcing the law. You cannot have it where the wealthy they get the break and the poor people pay all the dues. In America, for example, we went into a big financial collapse because the banks, without oversight, they foreclosed on homes, targeting people of color. They stole and took people's houses. We bail out the banks without linkage to lending or the reinvestment. We bail out the insurance companies. We bail out the rich and we put out the poor. That's not right. Why does South Africa do so well in soccer, for example? How could you host the global world soccer meeting here in South Africa? And the winner wins and has some degree of glee. The loser loses, but with dignity, because whenever the playing field is even and the rules are public and the goals are clear and the referees are fair and the score is transparent, you can win. That's the big fight, equality, to get an even playing field, even access to education and jobs and to overcome poverty and malnutrition and HIV/AIDS, even the playing field, you see many of these problems go away.
But now, getting back to the issue of corruption, I mean, how do you, on a personal level, deal with the allegations of corruption? How do you...
Well,
how do you,
most people are not corrupt.
Let me phrase it like this. How do you deal with the expectation that you and your family should be above reproach on an issue like corruption?
Well, you cannot stop the crisis in people's lives. You can have laws, you're governed by laws and not by privilege. That's all that you really can do. Most people are not involved in corruption. And you cannot use a broad brush to paint everybody with it because it's not true. And you put things in some context. This country is making progress. You're freer than you've ever been. You have a vote that you've never had. You have jobs you've never had. You can have dreams you've never had before. There's nothing you cannot become in this society. You're just 19. You're free, but not equal. Now you have another challenge, globalization. We've globalized capital. But even when blacks, whites, and browns find common ground, on your best day, you must not compete with China and Brazil and the U.S. for market space. So now you've globalized capital. We must not globalize human rights. If not, inhuman rights will undermine human rights. Globalize human capital, human rights, workers' rights, women's rights, children's rights, and environmental security. So in some sense, we cannot be static. But there's nothing greater for us to do right now than to use our minds and our morals as our levers.
But Reverend Jackson, you're not answering my question.
I don't know how.
I think what I'm getting to is, how do you then lead by example? How do you and your family lead by example in this area of corruption? I mean, when the expectation is that you should be above reproach and the issues there clearly, how do you see that we can learn from you and your family?
I guess you know that I'm leading by example, but all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And somewhere in the scheme of things is something called forgiveness and mercy and redemption and renewal and revival. And so we do fall down and we get back up again. And no one is free of falling down, but you're not measured by how many times you fell down, but how many times you got up. Because you fall down and the ground is no place for a champion. You get back up over and over again. And people watching now, you may say, well, I fell down. Don't just lay there. You're not ground destined. So if you slip up, trip up, you're knocked down, get up again. That's all human beings can do.
And I think that is a very good point on which we must take a quick break. And when we come back, we talk about issues in the US and also the relations between that country and North Korea. And we want to get your thoughts on that right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're chatting to Reverend Jesse Jackson, and we are taking your SMSs on 33726 and also your Facebook messages on Interface on SABC3. And just as we're about to wrap up, a couple of questions coming through for you on Facebook and also on our SMS line. And one of the most prominent ones is they want to know how your relationship is right now with President Obama after the unfortunate comments of 2008. How are you now?
Good one. I voted for him 10 times. I'm glad about it. We've been blessed to have him as our president. When he came into office, we were 4 million jobs down. We're 6 million jobs up, so the arrow's up. We're excited about that. More Americans have health coverage now, and it's been a big battle to get it there. Automotive industry is back now. It was gone. We're out of Iraq now, fighting a war. It's back now. He's fighting tremendous odds of hostility and hate and hurt, but somehow he keeps making it, and he has our strong support in doing it. And I'm delighted that tonight to be able to say that his views toward Africa are enlightening.
And do you think that he's representing what you would have done had you been in office back in the day?
Well, I think those are his dreams and aspirations. He's faced levels of hostility we've never known before. He becomes a president, and he's called liar from the floor of the well of the Capitol, and there's no punishment for the man who did it. He goes home and raised $2 million that weekend for bad manners. You're not an American. You're not a Christian. You're not born here. So he faces these, as he climbs this hill, he's facing rocks coming in his face. And yet he and his wife, with amazing degree of dignity and discipline, have kept his eyes on the prize. And I think that his second win may very well bring about a cooling of some of the hostility because they can't beat him. His moral authority is superior to his opposition.
Do you support his approach to Iran and North Korea? You know, the whole idea of branding them outliers and so saying that you can actually bring them back into the fold of the international community if they do certain things right.
I support the withdrawing troops from Iraq, which he promised to do, and the date certain together of Afghanistan, which he promised to do. So far, he's not moving precipitously on North Korea, even though as a real threat to South Korea, our strong ally. Yeah. Maybe even a threat to Japan as well in the Gulf area. And so I think that that he is chosen not to engage in the preemptive strike as Bush did in Iraq, which would have been the wrong thing to do. So I think he's being tough but measured because it's a very difficult teacher situation.
But some are criticizing him and saying he's too soft.
Well, there are those who would want him to do what we did in Iraq. We preempted. We were tough in Iraq. Hit the wrong target. We killed 100,000 Iraqis. 6,000 Americans were killed. 50,000 Americans were injured. $2 trillion spent. It's the wrong target. And I would too arrogant to say I apologize for a huge error. President Barack detected that error and campaigned on it. And because Hillary Clinton voted for it and he refused to vote for it, it became a key to his victory. He did the right thing by opposing that war. He's doing the right thing now by pulling back on Afghanistan. It's an unwinnable war. We've done a lot to reinforce alliances in those countries, but we cannot police the world. You cannot put all your energy fighting Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and have not put seal relations with Cuba and in our own hemisphere with other nations.
Speaking of conflict, let's get back to the African continent. You've been doing quite a bit of work in Kenya and in the Gambia. Can you tell us a bit about that? Well,
in the Kenya, or in the Gambia, should I say, we'd heard that 40 people were scheduled to be executed, and 9 of them were. We met President Jammeh on some other occasions while here in Africa for various events, and we called him. James Gomez, our international director, is from the Gambia. We called him, asked him to allow us to meet with him before he killed any more people, executed any more. He said yes. We met with him, and after a couple of days, he agreed to put a stay on the executions and to release 4 Gambians, 2 of whom were Gambian Americans, from prison. So that was a good thing. It kind of cooled down that level of tension that was growing in that country. I hope they'll be able to move on toward their open, free, fair democracy because the Gambia has much potential. But where there is tension and war, there'll be no investment. Where there's no investment, there's no growth. But that's moving. We were able to go to Kenya for the celebration of Uhuru Kenyatta's inauguration. And President Zuma, of course, was there, along with Mugabe and others of them were there. And there had been some tension because there was some violence in 2007. And there was fear because the close election might happen again. Sure. I was able to talk from Venezuela with Mr. Odinga and Mr. Kenyatta and urge them, to restrain any language that might provoke people into fear, anger, and violence. And both agreed to do so. And Mr. Odinga said, I'll tell you what, I will wait until the judges determine this election to be valid before I'll make a move. He did. He accepted the judge's judgment. And now they've begun to communicate, and I look forward to, with great hopes for Kenya, because Kenya is the economic engine that drives the engine in all of East Africa. And in some sense, if they were the first hit by Al-Qaeda, and if Kenya is destabilized and hurt, it hurts millions of people.
Reverend, we've got to go, but quickly before we go, any chance that you might run for president one more time?
No, I have no desire to do that. I am obsessed with our human rights work. I'm convinced that we must fight for human rights and measure by one yardstick, and all of us must join the world court and accept world justice and world judgment to be world citizens.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us here on Interface. And that's how we come to the end of our program this evening. Remember that you can continue the chat with us on our email, that is interface@sabc.co.za, or on our Facebook page, Interface on 3. And that's how we come to the end. Join us again next week at the same time. From me, Thembisa Magele and the team, good night.